They called him the Baron Butcher of Chicago, a ruthless syndicate boss who could never produce an heir, rendering him entirely unmarriageable in the traditional underworld. Every woman feared his wrath, and no family would give him their daughter, until a desperate, plus-sized single mother walked straight into his crosshairs. Vincent Calvetti sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table in the back room of the Bella Notte social club on Belmont Avenue. At 38, Vincent was the undisputed boss of the Chicago outfit. He was a man carved from granite and violence, possessing a chillingly calm demeanor that terrified even his most seasoned captains. But in the whispered, shadowed corners of the Mafia underworld, Vincent was viewed with a glaring asterisk. He was infertile. 5 years ago, a botched hit orchestrated by the Lucchese family had left Vincent with 3 bullets in his lower abdomen. He survived, but the doctors confirmed he would never father a child. In a society that valued bloodlines and heirs above all else, this made him a pariah for marriage. The prominent Mafia families refused to marry their daughters to a dead-end boss, and Vincent, known for his cruel and unforgiving nature, refused to settle for a woman who only wanted his money. He needed a wife to project stability to the New York Commission, but he was fiercely opposed to the shallow, plastic socialites thrown his way. Miles away, in a cramped, mold-infested apartment in the South Side, 29-year-old Clara Jenkins was crying over a stack of final notice bills. Clara was not a mob princess. She was a waitress at a 24-hour diner, working double shifts just to keep the heat on for her 5-year-old son, Leo. Clara was a big woman, soft, plus-sized, with a body that carried the undeniable marks of motherhood and a life lived entirely in survival mode. She had spent years enduring the cruel jabs of society, hiding her generous curves under oversized, faded thrift store sweaters. Her ex-boyfriend, Billy Henderson, had been a charmer who left her with nothing but shattered self-esteem, a beautiful baby boy, and, unbeknownst to Clara, a massive unpaid gambling debt of $65,000. The collision of their worlds happened on a freezing Tuesday night in November. Clara had just finished her shift when 2 massive men in tailored suits, Paulie and Carmine, Vincent's top enforcers, cornered her in the diner's icy parking lot. Billy had skipped town, and in the underworld, debts did not disappear. They transferred. "Ms. Jenkins," Carmine said, his voice like gravel, "your ex left a tab. The boss wants to see you." Terrified for her life and for Leo, who was asleep in the back seat of her beat-up Honda Civic, Clara had no choice but to follow them. She was escorted into the sprawling, heavily guarded Calvetti estate on the Gold Coast. She clutched her worn purse to her chest, acutely aware of how out of place she looked. The opulent crystal chandeliers and marble floors mocked her scuffed sneakers and heavy, unfashionable winter coat. Vincent watched her enter his study from the shadows of his leather armchair. He expected weeping. He expected a frantic, fragile woman who would crumble under his gaze. Instead, he saw Clara. She was visibly trembling, her breathing shallow. But when she stepped into the light, her chin tilted up. Vincent's dark eyes swept over her. She was undeniably heavy, completely devoid of the sharp, starved angles of the women in his circle. She had full hips, a thick waist, and soft, flushed cheeks. For the first time in years, Vincent felt a strange, primal jolt. There was no pretense in her, no manufactured beauty, just raw, unfiltered reality. "I don't have $65,000, Clara said, her voice shaking but surprisingly loud in the quiet room. "I make $12 an hour, but if you hurt me, my son goes into foster care. And I swear to God, I will haunt you until the day you die." Vincent leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Billy Henderson signed your name as the guarantor on his markers, Clara. My business operates on consequences." "Then your business is stupid," she fired back, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "Because killing a poor waitress gets you exactly $0. Let me work it off. I'll clean this massive house. I'll cook. I'll do whatever it takes. Just let me raise my son." Vincent stared at her. The New York Commission was breathing down his neck, demanding he show a stable family image at the upcoming holiday syndicate gathering to prove he wasn't becoming an unhinged, rogue operator. He needed a wife. He needed a child to pose as his adopted heir. "You won't clean," Vincent said softly, standing up and walking around the desk. He towered over her, smelling of expensive cologne and danger. "You're going to marry me," Clara gasped, taking a step back, her back hitting the heavy oak doors. "What?" "A contract," Vincent clarified, his tone strictly business, though his eyes lingered on the soft swell of her breasts under her cheap sweater. "You marry me. You move in here with your son. You act as my devoted wife in public. In exchange, your debt is erased. Your son gets the best private schools in Chicago, and you will never worry about a heating bill again. 2 years, then you walk away a millionaire." Clara looked at the ruthless, scarred man before her. He was terrifyingly handsome, but the rumors she'd heard in the diner painted him as a monster. Yet the thought of Leo going hungry, or worse, being taken away by child services because she was killed over Billy's debt, left her with no choice. "I won't let you hurt my son," she whispered. "I protect what is mine," Vincent replied, his voice a low rumble. "Do we have a deal?" Slowly, Clara nodded. The wedding was a swift, quiet affair in a private judge's chamber, followed by Clara and Leo's immediate relocation to the Calvetti mansion. For Clara, the transition was jarring. She went from a drafty, one-bedroom apartment to a sprawling estate teeming with silent guards and luxury. Her new wardrobe, ordered by Vincent's assistants, consisted of high-end designer clothes tailored specifically for her plus-sized figure. When she looked in the mirror, wearing fine silks and cashmere that hugged her curves rather than hiding them, she didn't recognize herself. But underneath the expensive fabrics, her insecurities raged. She knew why Vincent had chosen her. She was desperate, manageable, and a complete outsider who wouldn't demand a real marriage from a man who couldn't give her a traditional family. Vincent, however, was experiencing a profound shift of his own. His home, usually a fortress of cold silence and brutal planning, was suddenly filled with life. 5-year-old Leo, entirely unaware of his new stepfather's deadly profession, was a whirlwind of energy. To the absolute shock of the household guards, Vincent didn't silence the boy. Instead, he found himself eating breakfast at the table just to watch Clara fuss over Leo's pancakes. Clara's presence was a balm Vincent hadn't known he needed. He watched the way she moved, the gentle sway of her wide hips, the soft maternal warmth she radiated. She didn't flinch when he came home with bruised knuckles. Instead, one evening, she quietly pulled him into the massive kitchen, wet a towel, and cleaned his hands without asking a single question. "You don't have to do that," Vincent had grumbled, rigid under her gentle touch. "I know," Clara had replied, not looking up. But nobody should have to sit with their pain alone. The real test of their arrangement came during the annual syndicate gala at the Drake Hotel. It was Clara's first public appearance. She wore a deep emerald green gown that accentuated her generous cleavage and draped beautifully over her heavy stomach and hips. She felt exposed, terrified of the judging eyes of Chicago's elite and the Mafia wives who looked like runway models. As they entered the ballroom, whispers immediately broke out. Vincent kept a firm, possessive hand on the small of her back. Clara tried to shrink into herself, her old habits of hiding taking over. But Vincent's grip tightened. "Stand tall," he murmured in her ear, his breath sending a shiver down her spine. "You are a Calvetti now. They are beneath you." Halfway through the evening, a captain from the rival Lucchese family, a slick, arrogant man named Frankie Russo, approached them. Frankie had a few too many drinks and a death wish. "Vinny," Frankie sneered, his eyes dropping to Clara with blatant disgust. "I heard you finally tied the knot. Didn't realize you were buying meat by the pound these days. What, the boss of Chicago can't score a woman who takes care of herself?" The ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Clara's face flushed violently, tears of humiliation springing to her eyes. She pulled back, wanting nothing more than to run to the bathroom and disappear. Before she could take a single step, Vincent's hand shot out. He grabbed Frankie by the throat, moving with such sudden, terrifying speed that the man's security detail didn't even have time to flinch. Vincent slammed Frankie backward onto a grand buffet table, shattering crystal glasses and sending expensive caviar flying. "Apologize to my wife," Vincent hissed, his voice low, deadly, and carrying across the dead silent room. He squeezed Frankie's windpipe, his knuckles turning white. "Apologize, or I will carve your tongue out and feed it to my dogs right here on this carpet." I'm sorry," Frankie choked out, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Calvetti." Vincent threw the man to the floor in disgust, adjusting his suit jacket as if he hadn't just nearly committed murder in front of 200 people. He turned to Clara, offering his arm. "Are you ready to go home, Mia Regina?" That night, in the quiet safety of their mansion, the invisible wall between them shattered. Clara, still shaken, knocked on Vincent's bedroom door. They had maintained separate rooms since the wedding. When he opened it, looking tired and rubbing his jaw, she didn't hesitate. She stepped inside and threw her arms around his waist, burying her face in his broad chest. Vincent froze. He was a man accustomed to violence, not affection. But as Clara's soft, full body pressed against his, all the coldness drained out of him. He wrapped his massive arms around her, burying his face in her hair. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nobody has ever stood up for me like that." "I will always stand up for you, Clara," he swore fiercely, tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "You are beautiful, every single part of you." For a few weeks, their fake marriage blossomed into genuine, fiery romance. Vincent was obsessed with her softness, finding comfort and absolute devotion in her arms, while Clara finally found a man who worshipped the body she had spent a lifetime hating. But a Mafia boss's life is never peaceful. Just as Clara began to feel truly safe, the shadows of her past violently resurfaced. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was picking Leo up from his exclusive private school in Lincoln Park, escorted by a single guard. As she helped Leo into the SUV, a black van screeched to a halt, blocking them in. Before her guard could draw his weapon, he was struck in the back of the head. The van doors slid open, and a man stepped out. Clara's blood ran completely cold. It was Billy Henderson, her deadbeat ex. But he wasn't looking like a degenerate gambler anymore. I was wearing an expensive suit, a cruel smile twisting his face, and standing right next to Albert Lucchese, the very man who had ordered the hit on Vincent years ago. "Hello, Clara," Billy grinned, his eyes shifting to little Leo. "Looks like my son is moving up in the world. Time for a family reunion." The heavy steel doors of the abandoned meat-packing facility in Cicero slammed shut, echoing like a gunshot through the frigid, cavernous space. Clara was thrown roughly onto the concrete floor, her knees scraping harshly against the gravel. She immediately curled her large frame around Leo, shielding his small body from the damp chill and the terrifying men surrounding them. "Keep your hands off him!" Clara screamed, her maternal instincts completely overriding her fear. She glared up at Billy Henderson, who was casually adjusting the cuffs of a cheap knockoff designer suit. "Always so dramatic, Clara," Billy sneered, lighting a cigarette and tossing the match onto the wet floor. "You always were too loud, too big, too much of a headache. But I gotta say, you finally paid off. Turns out, your new husband has a lot of enemies who are willing to pay top dollar to find his weak spot." From the shadows, Albert Lucchese emerged. He was an older man, leaning heavily on a silver-tipped cane, his face mapped with the scars of a lifetime in the Mafia. He looked at Clara with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. "So this is the sow Calvetti took to his bed," Albert mocked, his voice a raspy wheeze. "The great ruthless Vincent Calvetti, the Baron Butcher, playing house with another man's discarded trash. The New York Commission is going to laugh him out of the syndicate when they find out his so-called heir is just a street rat he bought to save face." Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. She realized then that this wasn't just about ransom. It was a calculated political assassination. In the brutal hierarchy of the Italian-American Mafia, a boss without a legitimate bloodline was considered a temporary placeholder. Vincent had used his marriage to project the image of a growing dynasty, but Albert intended to parade Billy in front of the New York bosses, led by the formidable Richard Costello, to prove that Vincent's dynasty was a complete fabrication. "You don't know my husband," Clara said, her voice dropping to a low, steady timbre that surprised even her. "He won't negotiate with you. He'll bury you." "We'll see about that," Albert chuckled dryly. He gestured to one of his heavily armed thugs. "Call Calvetti. Put it on speaker." 10 miles away, the Calvetti estate had transformed into a war room. Vincent stood over his mahogany desk, his face a mask of terrifying, murderous calm. Carmine and his tactical lieutenant, Samuel Rossi, were tracking street cameras and mobilizing an army of hitmen. When the burner phone on Vincent's desk rang, the room went dead silent. Vincent picked it up. "Speak." "Vinny," Albert Lucchese's gravelly voice filled the room. "I have your lovely wife and the boy. You know, for a man who claims Chicago, you left your backyard wide open. I want the Southside shipping ports signed over to my family by midnight, and I want you to step down as the head of the Commission's Midwest operations. If you don't, I let Billy here blow his kid's brains out, and I send your fat wife back to you in pieces." A heavy silence stretched across the line. Vincent didn't shout. He didn't curse. When he finally spoke, his voice was so cold it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "Albert," Vincent said softly. You made fatal miscalculation. You think because I cannot create a child, I do not know how to be a father. You think because my wife is soft, I have gone soft. Listen to me very carefully. Keep the phone on. Before Albert could respond, the sound of a massive explosion shattered the line. Over the speaker, Albert heard the frantic screams of his own men in the background. What the hell was that? Albert barked. That, Vincent replied coldly, was your safe house on Lake Shore Drive. Your brother was inside. You have 30 seconds to tell me where my family is, or your son's townhouse in Naperville is next. Panic flashed across Albert's face. He had underestimated the sheer psychopathic lengths Vincent would go to for a woman and a child who weren't even his by blood. In the warehouse, Billy panicked. Seeing the Luquet's boss suddenly sweat, Billy pulled a snub-nosed revolver from his jacket and pointed it directly at Clara. Forget the negotiations, Albert. Let's just kill them and run. Clara didn't freeze. A lifetime of being pushed around, of feeling inadequate, of hating her own body, evaporated in the face of her son's imminent death. She wasn't a fragile, petite mob wife. She was a mother, and she had mass. With a primal scream, Clara lunged upward. She threw her entire weight forward, driving her shoulder directly into Billy's midsection before he could pull the trigger. The impact was devastating. Billy, completely unprepared for her speed and sheer force, was thrown backward. The gun fired wildly into the ceiling, the deafening crack echoing through the warehouse. Billy crashed onto a rusted conveyor belt, gasping for air as his ribs cracked under her assault. Clara scrambled to grab the dropped weapon, but one of Lucchese's thugs grabbed her by the hair, dragging her backward. Suddenly, the steel doors of the warehouse blew entirely off their hinges. A matte black Cadillac Escalade rammed through the opening, tires squealing on the concrete. But before the vehicle even came to a complete stop, the doors flew open. Vincent stepped out into the smoke and dust, an assault rifle raised to his shoulder. He looked like the Grim Reaper in a bespoke, tailored suit. The gunfight was brief, brutal, and entirely one-sided. Vincent's men, led by Carmine and Samuel, flooded the building with tactical precision. Lucchese's thugs dropped one by one, overwhelmed by the sheer firepower and the terrifying wrath of the Calvetti syndicate. Vincent moved through the chaos with dead-eyed focus. He didn't waste bullets. Every shot found its mark. He spotted Albert Lucchese attempting to limp toward a back exit. Vincent drew his sidearm, a heavy custom .45 caliber, and shot Albert directly in the kneecap. The older boss collapsed with a shrieking howl, sprawling on the wet concrete. But Vincent's eyes immediately swept the room for Clara. He found her, huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped entirely around Leo, shielding the boy's eyes from the violence. Her beautiful face was bruised, and her dress was torn, but she was alive. Clara, Vincent breathed, dropping his weapons and sliding to his knees beside her. He pulled her and Leo into his chest, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her skin. His hands trembled, the first time any of his men had ever seen the boss show a physical sign of fear. "We're okay," Clara sobbed, clutching the lapels of his suit, grounding him. "I've got him, Vincent." "We're okay." From across the room, a pathetic groan echoed. Billy Henderson was trying to crawl away, clutching his broken ribs. Vincent's tender expression vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, dead mask of the butcher. He stood up, towering over the room. "Carmine," Vincent ordered, not taking his eyes off Billy. "Take my wife and son to the car." "No," Clara said. Vincent turned back to her, surprised. Clara stood up. She didn't try to hide her torn clothes or shrink herself. She stood tall, her generous curves cutting a commanding silhouette against the smoke of the warehouse. She looked at Billy. The man who had ruined her credit, broken her heart, and just tried to murder their son. "You don't get to hide from this, Billy," Clara said, her voice steady and echoing with newfound authority. She looked at Vincent. "Handle him, but do not let him die quickly." A slow, dark smile spread across Vincent's face. He had married her for convenience, but looking at her now, fierce, unyielding, and utterly commanding, he knew she was exactly what a Mafia queen was meant to be. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City was thick with cigar smoke and tension. The Commission, the governing body of the American Mafia, was holding its summit. Richard Costello, the supreme boss, sat at the head of the table. Vincent sat near the front, Clara by his side. She wore a stunning, custom-tailored crimson gown that hugged her full hips and accentuated her curves. She wore a diamond choker that cost more than most people made in a decade, but her true power came from the icy, confident glare she leveled at the men in the room who dared to look at her twice. "Calvetti," Richard Costello began, steepling his fingers. "The Lucchese family is in shambles. Albert is in a wheelchair, drinking his meals through a straw. And rumors are flying that this boy of yours isn't your blood. You know the rules, Vincent. A boss without a true heir cannot hold a seat at this table. It disrupts the lineage." Vincent stood up slowly. He motioned to the heavy double doors. Carmine pushed them open, and little Leo walked in, dressed in a miniature tuxedo, looking directly at Vincent for reassurance. Vincent smiled warmly at the boy, then turned his hardened gaze to Costello. "Blood is a biological accident, Richard," Vincent stated, his voice resonating through the grand hall. He pulled out a hunting knife and, without flinching, sliced the palm of his own hand. He then knelt before Leo, gently taking the boy's hand and making a tiny prick on his thumb. He pressed their hands together. "This boy carries my name. He carries my protection. And as of this moment, by the ancient laws of Omerta and the blood oath, he carries my blood," Vincent declared, locking eyes with every mob boss in the room. "He is the sole heir to the Chicago Syndicate. If any man in this room wishes to contest the legitimacy of my son, you can step outside with me right now. But pack a body bag before you do." The room was dead silent. The sheer audacity, backed by Vincent's terrifying reputation, and the recent, brutal dismantling of the Lucchese family, left no room for argument. Richard Costello looked at the bleeding hand, looked at the defiant, beautiful, plus-sized woman sitting beside Vincent, and finally he nodded. "The Commission recognizes Leo Calvetti as the rightful heir to Chicago. Take your seat, Vincent." That night, standing on the balcony of their penthouse suite, overlooking the glittering skyline of Manhattan, Vincent wrapped his arms around Clara from behind, resting his hands on the soft swell of her stomach. "You terrified half the Commission today," Vincent murmured into her ear, pressing a kiss to her temple. They expected a meek, broken woman. Instead, they met the Queen of Chicago. Clara leaned back into his solid chest, a profound sense of peace settling over her. For years, she had been told she was too big, too poor, and entirely unlovable. But in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, she had finally found a place where she was perfect. "I guess they didn't realize," Clara smiled, resting her hands over his, that when you have nothing left to lose, you learn how to fight like a boss. Vincent turned her around in his arms, his dark eyes filled with absolute adoration and a fierce, burning love. You are my life, Clara. My wife. My family. Forever. As he kissed her under the city lights, the shadows of their pasts completely faded away, replaced by the unbreakable empire they had built together. Did Clara and Vincent's incredible journey from desperate strangers to the unstoppable king and queen of the Chicago Syndicate leave you breathless? True love and fierce loyalty come in all shapes and sizes, proving that a mother's wrath and a kingpin's devotion can conquer any enemy. If you loved this intense, twist-filled mafia romance drama, hit that like button, share this story with your friends who love a badass heroine, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling real-life tales.